Is that correct? For NATO and Ukraine, Reality Bites. I'm pulling it up now.
Yep, that's my Winona Ryder reference. Yes.
Yes. You make the conclude that the only option for Ukraine, almost the inevitable outcome of the conflict, is going to be unconditional surrender, and you outline almost a World War II like scenario where Ukraine plays the role of Japan. Could you give a picture of where the conflict is? Because I feel like over the last several weeks, about a week and a half ago, I spoke at the UN Security Council, and around that time, it has felt like there's been a lot of admissions from the collective West that things haven't been going well from with the counteroffensive, but there's also been seemingly a lot of deflection from the reality as well. So talk about why reality bites for Ukraine and, of course, for NATO right now, and where that's all going to head.
Sure. First of all, congratulations on your Security Council appearance. Very impressive. You did a good job.
Thank you.
But it's also, it's one of those experiences that'll last you forever. You were literally in the seat of world power. That's where the decisions are making, and you're briefing the decision makers. So congratulations on that. Now, after I've finished kissing your butt and licking your boots, invite me on again, Danny. No, I'm joking. Isn't that how it works? But scratch my back, scratch your back. Yeah. Well, trust me, I had nothing to do with getting you to the Security Council. And had I been involved, I can guarantee they would have vetoed you, because every time I get invited to do that, the Americans and the Brits go, nah, he ain't even set foot in this building. So again, good job. Now, come back to your question. How best to explain this? Because I don't want to spend a year and a half going through. I did a lot of detail with Prigozhin because I think that needed to happen. But I think I can visualize this a little bit better. Imagine the front line being 100 yards long. Okay, it's not, it's 1,000 miles long, but we're just going to, for visualization, 100 miles of contact. And the Russians have a piece of string, and they draw it from one end to the other. That means they have a continuous line of forces. The string represents the troops. They have a continuous line of forces. Now, back last fall, the Russians didn't have a 100-meter piece of string. They had an 80-meter piece of string. And they had to cut it up into pieces and put the piece of string to cover the lines. And there were gaps. And the Ukrainians were able to go through those gaps and push the Russians back until they could get all that string to line up. They had to shorten their line of defense to make the string work. Since then, they've mobilized 300,000 men. They've brought in another 280,000 volunteers, and they got a whole bunch of string. So they have enough string for the entire line, and they got an entire ball of string in the back that they can put in, double it up, triple it up. They got a lot of string. Ukrainians have a piece of string too, and they have other string that they've been getting from NATO, pieces of string. But now the string gets into a war with each other. It frays itself. They're rubbing against each other. And every once in a while, the string breaks because it gets worn out. And you have to replace it. So the Ukrainians are cutting pieces of string, tying them together because you want to maintain that entire continuity. But they're running out of string. Fact is, they're out of string. And they have lots of holes now. A lot of the holes, because as they get a hole where they want people, they have to go up over here and clip, cut that string out, tie it in. That's called taking a brigade from this part over here. You're filling a gap, but you just created a gap. The Russians don't have a gap. They have continuous string, and that string keeps pushing. And the other thing the Russians are doing is they push, you got this thin line, and then the Russians advance, and it bows and becomes this bulge. What happens when you take string on the thin line? You have this much string. But now when you have this bow, string isn't enough. Well, the Russians can go to that ball of string, pull it out, and make it work. Ukrainians can't. So the more the Russians push and expand, the bigger the gaps come before the Ukrainians because they don't have any string left. And eventually what's going to happen is the Ukrainian line is going to collapse. And that's where we're at right now. And there's nothing they can do to change it because there's no more string. They're out of string. They don't have any more manpower. There's no more tanks. There's no more infantry fighting vehicles. There's nothing left. They just threw in their last 3 brigade strategic reserve. This was the strategic reserve that was supposed to take advantage of the initial attack, which broke through Robotyno, which didn't back in June. And then the secondary attack against Tokmak, they had another 6 brigades that were supposed to break through Tokmak. And when that happened, the final 3 brigades came through, and they were supposed to drive through the Melitopol, raise the flag, declare victory. You know where those 3 brigades are right now? They're dying in front of Robotyno. They're right back where it all started. They've never advanced very far at all. You know, there's some talk that they've actually, I don't know if you can hear a cat. I got a very unhappy cat right now who's meowing. But so I have dogs and cats. And for anybody who's going to criticize me, stick it in your ear. These are my animals, my house, my rules. But again, I'm in a bad mood tonight. So, but the whole thing is the brigade that's supposed to have won the battle for them, 82nd Air Landing Brigade with the Challenger tanks and the Marder infantry fighting vehicles and the Strykers, they're all getting blown up right now at Robotyno. Did the Ukrainians take Robotyno? Maybe. But what they took is a destroyed village, and they lost everything to advance 4 kilometers. Now they got nothing left. The Russians ain't letting them go any further because Russia's got nothing but string to put out there. Lots of string. They have 250,000 troops that they have yet to commit to this battle. Troops that are waiting, trained, equipped, chomping at the bit. And again, that's string that's going to go in the gaps. It's going to take this out. When this attack against Robotyno fails, and it's failing right now, there's no chance of success. The Ukrainians are done. They're finished. And at that point in time, I believe that rather than allow the battle to get out of control, you know, if they say, well, we're going to hold this line, they can't hold the line. They don't have enough troops to hold the line. The Russians are going to find the gaps and move through. And then they're going to get surrounded, then they're going to be destroyed, and that's the end of it. What the Ukrainian army is going to do, I believe, is to say, remember when I talked about what the Russians did, all the broken string, they brought it back to get a straight line? The Ukrainians are going to go, we need to withdraw behind the Dnieper River so we can take whatever string we have left and make a common defense. That's their last chance. And so that's the direction I think they're having. That's why reality bites, because frankly speaking, unless there's a secret Ukrainian army out there that nobody knows anything about, they're out of string. So that's going to happen. And when that happens, the Ukrainians now have a choice, because when they withdraw behind the Dnieper River, understand what just happened. They lost Kharkov. They lost Dnipropetrovsk. They're going to lose Mykolaiv. And when I say lose, they're never getting it back. You see, Ukraine had a chance to negotiate an end to this conflict. That was last March. Last March, they got a really good deal, a better deal than I would have ever given them had I been Vladimir Putin. But my name's Scott Ritter. I ain't Russian. So, and I'm a mean son of a gun when you criticize my dogs. So, you know, the fact of the matter is Russia cut them a great deal. There was literally no denazification whatsoever. The Ukrainian government stayed in place. There was no demands made on anything. Demilitarization was minimal. They just simply had to have a buffer zone. They could have security arrangements with everybody but NATO. You couldn't be a member of NATO. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Sumy, Kiev, all that territory was returned to the Ukrainians. Lugansk and Donetsk would come in, retain their independence because Russia can't change that status. They voted for it, but Russia would say that is an issue to be left to a referendum that will be managed by everybody, an international referendum. And that's the deal that the Ukrainians were going to get, a really good deal at a time when they had probably lost around 60,000 dead. It's still a lot, but it ain't 400,000. But the Ukrainians turned it down, rejected it. They mocked the Russians afterwards, saying, we were leading you on the whole time. I don't think they were. I think what happened is Boris Johnson flew in and gave Zelensky the good news that you lose all support if you go with this peace deal. So Zelensky backed out. And then now we have a situation where Russia has taken 4 territories. They ain't giving them back. Understand that. That's the other part of reality bites. Ukrainians are operating under this insanity that says we have 10 points that we demand of the Russians. Let me give you a pro hint, Ukraine. Before you make demands, you have to win. Okay? You have to win, and you ain't winning. You're losing. So let's forget the demands. Some of these demands are just stupid, like you must return the territories to us, including Crimea. Really? You guys, I hope everybody listening understands this. Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donbass, Lugansk are Russia forever. Forever. They will never give them up. And what I mean by that is if Ukraine was ever successful enough to break through and threaten seizing these territories, Russia would use nuclear weapons because it represents an existential threat to the survival of Russia. It would be the end of Ukraine, the end of NATO, the end of the world. So for all the people out there going, we support Ukraine, we want Ukraine to win, what you're saying is, I want to die, because you'll die. It'll be a nuclear war and you'll die. So please stop praying for a Ukrainian victory. If you don't like me, I know many people don't, that's okay. But respect the fact that I have daughters who one just got married. Now she has a new life coming up. I have another one who's engaged. She's going to get married. She has a new life. Hopefully they have kids, new generation. I'd like the world to be here for a potential grandchildren to grow up in. And I would hope that you would feel the same way about your potential grandchildren going down there. But quit saying you want Ukraine to recapture Crimea, because all you're saying is you want Russia to use nuclear weapons. It's a 100% guarantee that they would use nuclear weapons, just like we would use nuclear weapons if Mexico, backed by China and Russia, threatened to take Texas, Arizona, and California away from us. Historically, people could say, well, it used to be Mexico. It's theirs. They deserve it back. Well, it's America now, and it's going to be America forever. We're not giving it back. And if you try and take it from us, that's an existential threat to our survival as a nation state. And we will use every weapon necessary to prevent that from happening. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Russia has the same philosophy. So, but Ukraine's saying, we want those territories back. First reality bite, you ain't never going to get the territories back. Now, there's some people who have, including the deputy head of NATO, Mr. Janssen, who has come out and said, Ukraine has to consider territorial concessions in exchange for NATO membership. And if you accept that Russia has these territories, we're going to let you into NATO. Two things about that. One, it's implied that the acceptance of the territory is temporary in nature. You're just going to temporarily, wink, wink, say, okay, Russia's yours. But in the long term, we're going to never change the map. We're going to continue to sanction Russia. And eventually, we're going to get them back. But then we're going to let you into NATO. Do you not understand why this war began in the first place? Because Russia said Ukraine will never be part of NATO. Never, ever, ever, ever be part of NATO. I don't know what's one of those never, ever, evers isn't understood, but it will never, ever, ever happen. But Ukraine doesn't understand that either. That's the other part of reality bites. But here's the other thing about reality bites. Not only is Russia going to keep the territories it's already brought into the Russian Federation, but if Ukraine is stupid enough to continue allowing this war to go and not seeking a negotiated off-ramp, when the string breaks and it's getting ready to break and Russia moves forward, Russia will own Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, and it will become Russia forever. Once they get it, they will never get it back. And when Russia decides after they do that, that maybe it's time now to go to Odessa, they will take Odessa, and then they will go up and secure the Black Sea coast up to the Transnistria region on the border with Moldova. And all that territory will become forever Russia, which means that Ukraine will have lost access to the Black Sea, which is a disaster for Ukraine's economy. So now Ukraine will become a landlocked nation, significantly reduced. And once people start taking out the knives and cutting it up, you understand that the head of Hungary just visited the Transcarpathian region of Ukraine and alluded to the Hungarian majority population there, that their future is with Hungary. So the Hungarians are going to go, wait a minute, you guys are cutting up Ukraine? We take our part. And then the Poles are going to go, wait, Volyn belongs to us. Volyn belongs to us. They murdered all the Poles. We're going to take it back. And they're going to come in and cut it up. And Ukraine's going to become this tiny little postage stamp nation in the middle of nowhere with all they have is agronomy as their economy. And that's it. It's a pathetic third world state, which will never be anything and probably beg the Russians to just absorb it and get it over with. That's the future of Ukraine. Reality bites. The only way this war ends is if Ukraine turns to Russia and says, help. And Russia will say, here's the deal. Unconditional surrender. You don't get to say anything. Shut up. You are now the Japanese on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, September 2nd, 1945. You got your butts handed to you, and we are blessing you with a chance to have an end to this conflict instead of killing all of you as we should do. I'm a little bloodthirsty right now, but the Russians will say, these are the terms. Unconditional surrender. You will accept what we tell you. And I believe the terms would actually be very, very benevolent. I believe the Russians aren't in the business of seeking additional territories. I know that's going to anger a lot of Russians who may watch this program, who will say Odessa is Russia, will always be Russia, and Putin will never abandon Odessa. Odessa doesn't belong to Putin. Putin's never claimed Odessa. They'll say Kharkov is Russian, never abandoned it. Kharkov doesn't belong to Russia. Putin's never claimed it. Putin doesn't want it. We already know that. How do we know that? Because in the original peace agreement, Kharkov was a Ukrainian city. Odessa was a Ukrainian city. Kherson was a Ukrainian city. Russia wasn't going for these cities. They weren't trying to seize territory. They took these territories when Ukraine decided to prolong the war, to expand the war, and Russia realized that the ethnic Russian populations of these territories were at risk. And therefore, Putin, going back to his 2005 speech, where he said the greatest catastrophe of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Everyone sees he's trying to get the Soviet Union back, but they never listened to the rest of it, because overnight tens of millions of Russians became homeless. And I, as the president of Russia, have a responsibility to the Russian nation. And the Russian nation isn't defined by borders, but defined by common ethnicity, common religion, common culture, common history. And so the ethnic Russians of Ukraine are part of the Russian nation. Putin has an obligation to help them. Go back to what I said earlier about his number one priority is to do what's right for the Russian people, for the Russian state, and protecting the Russians of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Donetsk from a Ukrainian government that has been affiliated with the Banderist ideology, which is premised on the necessity of killing non-pure Ukrainians to make a pure Ukrainian state. Not theory, reality. It's what they did for a living from 1943 to 1954. And so Putin said, no, we're securing that. Now, if you want Putin to reconsider the future of Odessa, the future of Kharkov, the future of Dnipropetrovsk, the future of all of Ukraine to the east of the Dnieper River, continue the war. And Putin will take them, and once he has them, he will not give them back. That's my belief, not my knowledge, because I don't work for Putin. I'm not in the inner circle hearing what he has to say. That's just my assessment of Russia, that they are trying to get these territories, but if you compel them to expend Russian life and resources to defeat you because you refuse to do the right thing and terminate a war that can't be won, once they get Odessa, they're not going to allow that Russian population to be turned back over to Ukrainian government. So this is why reality bites. The only outcome to this conflict is an unconditional surrender on the part of Ukraine. The only choice Ukraine has is when they will choose unconditional surrender and what they want Ukraine to look like at that time. The sooner they choose unconditional surrender, the bigger and more viable Ukraine will be. The longer they drag this out and make Russia expend life, resources, etc., the smaller Ukraine will be. And the ultimate calamity for Ukraine is that there will be no Ukraine, because this war could go to its logical conclusion. Now, people will say, well, Scott, why would Ukrainians do that? I just spent an entire week reading up on the history of the Banderist ideology, the Banderists. And the reason why I bring that up is they're alive and well and living today in Ukraine. People tend to poo-poo that, don't. They are the dominant ideology in the Ukrainian government today. This is why the 82nd Air Landing Brigade, who's currently leading the attack against Robotyno, when they graduated from their course of instruction in Great Britain, got together and sang the ballad to Bandera, doing the Nazi salute while they do it. All right, this is why Zelensky, the head of the Ukrainian army, has Bandera's portrait in his office. This is why they all worship this guy. It's alive, it's well, it's living, it's odious, it's disgusting, and the Banderist ideology is such, not only do they proudly embrace the words of Bandera when he was in a court in Poland, I think in 1936, for murder, charged with murdering a Polish politician. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's pretty accurate, that he would accept the sacrifice of 1 million innocent people if it meant creating a Ukrainian state. So he's willing to kill 1 million innocent people, not combatants, innocent people. And then they did it. They went out and they slaughtered Poles, 110,000, Volyn Massacre, 43, 44, over 200,000 Eastern Ukrainians, Western Ukrainians. They killed the Western Ukrainians. When the Soviets came back, a lot of people don't realize this. I just found it out. About 300,000 Eastern Ukrainians were brought over to the West to help repopulate the area, bring the schools back up, to administer the territories. And the Banderas went to war against them, killing 200,000 of them. It's not a joke. They murdered people. This was a major war. Tens of thousands of Russian soldiers were killed in this struggle. And in the end, many of these Banderists said that the solution isn't to surrender. The solution is just to kill everybody until they died. They're suicidal. So their feeling is if there can't be a Ukraine, then everybody must die. So when people say, well, Scott, you're being a little extreme here talking about the end of Ukraine. Not really, not if you take the time to study the Banderist ideology and how they behaved in the past and what they believe in today. They will gladly sacrifice themselves and Ukraine if the Ukraine that exists doesn't meet the exacting standards of purity set by Stepan Bandera, one of history's greatest mass murderers.